Speaking of Big 12 games, how about that Alabama-Mississippi game?
Yeah.
Dude. So couple stats from that game. Let me pull them out here. 111 points scored. Hit the over. Is the most in a non-overtime SEC game in the history of the conference. What was it? 600 and how many yards did Ole Miss have? 644.
Yes.
Something like that. 647. 647 was the most ever put on a Nick Saban defense. But here's this is the stat that's unbelievable. Let me pull it up. It is Ole Miss. This is from Roger Sherman's Twitter. Ole Miss's defense prevented 41 yards of offense tonight. So to be clear what that means, on 11 drives, they allowed 9 touchdowns, forced a punt at the 40, and a fumble at the 1-yard line. If Alabama had gained every possible yard, they would have gained 764 yards. Instead, they only gained 723.
That's some glass half full. Hey, we stopped them from getting 41 yards.
Shout out to Roger Sherman. There we go, right there.
Teams can do that. And that game was. I mean, I don't want to sit here and do like the whole thing where I'm calling the Big 12 game action and then saying this game was great, but I do feel like this game was better executed. Like defensively, it was still a complete mess. And in a weird way, I feel like Texas, Oklahoma defensively were probably a little better than both of the teams in this game. But just as far as offense is concerned and scheming things and getting things happening, I thought like this was a very fun and interesting battle between Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin, two guys who have known each other for a very long time, have coached together for a very long time, going way back to their time together at USC, and, two guys who are friends. And I thought that felt like, in a weird way, it felt like two friends playing NCAA football on the PlayStation.
Yeah. It did.
And that's exactly what happens if you play 15-minute quarters, which is why you only play 5-minute quarters, and it doesn't get out of hand like that. Right. I mean, the efficiency was there, certainly. So do you come away from it? I don't come away with it with any major adjustment for Alabama. I mean, it looked like.
I've been very much a pro Ole Miss offense guy, and I've been that's the whole reason that I believed in this game and all the points that are going to be scored. So I do think that there shouldn't be like hand wringing necessarily over Alabama's defense, but I mean, what I asked, like, I want to know what the, like, what are we calling it that Roger Sherman said, the 41-yard Ole Miss prevented, yards prevented. Like, what are Alabama's yards prevented? I mean, Ole Miss was got it rolling pretty good. So I think that there is some concern here about particularly maybe the secondary. I mean, Daniel Wright was letting Kenny Yeboah run free an awful lot out there in the back end. And like Ole Miss was just, I mean, this was a secondary that came into the season inexperienced, and people had their doubts and questions or whatever. So maybe we need to continue to keep an eye on that. I did notice there was at one point, I don't know if it was just sort of one shot or they showed a few of them, but you're starting to get the old, like,
Pete Golding,
Nick Saban pacing around Pete Golden, just like yelling into the yelling into the air around him.
Yeah,
like we used to have with Lane Kiffin, like the old like Saban yelling at his coordinator shots. So that's never a good sign.
That was actually where I was going with this. I'm not adjusting specifically my thoughts for Alabama as a team. Like, I think that Alabama will get lured into games like this. Like, even really, really good Alabama defenses have gotten suckered into a 46-41 game against Ole Miss. Like, it's just, it kind of will snowball out of control. But the takeaway was that Pete Golding is no longer, like, whatever the honeymoon phase was for him is done. Like, this is it. Like, he started the season with all these narratives and all these quotes about how this group is really looking to prove that last year wasn't us. We're going to reestablish our identity. And that message has resonated to enough. I mean, look, I repeated it. Like Brad Nessler talked about it on the SEC on CBS postgame show on CBS Sports HQ. So I think that Tide defense, it's going to keep coming along week after week. Like it's the Alabama information machine got enough people believing that there was going to be a big step forward. And maybe there's not going to be a big step forward. I still think that Alabama as a team still is good enough in the right places to win a national championship. I mean, shocker, big stretch right there, I'm sure. But it's not like this is going to be a massive red flag for me, especially going into Georgia week, because Georgia's not Ole Miss and Georgia's not going to stress Alabama the way that Ole Miss can. And there's only, maybe 5 or 6 teams in the entire country that would be able to have those same kinds of advantages. So I loved the Pete Golding shots. It's awesome.
We don't see offenses putting up 600 yards on Alabama very often, but it's not like this is crazy because, LSU put up 559 yards on Alabama last year in that 46-41 win.
That was the best team of all time.
Mm-hmm. But Barton, going back to your question, Alabama's defense prevented 141 yards tonight, if we don't count the end of the halves. They got 2 punts and 2 field goals. So 100 yards better than the Rebels defense. Was just a stellar performance from the Alabama defense. But I think the difference is, though, like when we talk about the Oklahoma defense or the Texas defense or the Big 12 defense in general, compared to what Alabama's was, because Alabama's defense had a horrible night and Alabama still won by 15 points. And the difference is because the simple fact of the matter is that a well-executed offense is always going to beat a defense, no matter how good and how talented the defense is. So that was always the fallacy of the SEC in recent years, where they were talking about how they had great defenses. They did, but there weren't any great offenses in the conference to beat them on a regular basis either. We've seen in the last few years that the SEC has better executed offenses that have now molded and blended with the better talent that they have compared to everybody else. And this is what's going to happen, where we're going to see Alabama give up, numbers like this on a game like this. But then we'll start seeing, like people talking about, oh, well, if this was a Big 12 game, people would be saying it's just terrible defense. But the difference is this doesn't happen to Alabama every week. This happens to a lot of Big 12 teams every week. Like Oklahoma the last few years, this was happening to them, not to this extent where it's 650 yards, but that was happening to them almost every week by just about anybody in the Big 12, not just the best teams in the conference, like the bad teams in the conference were able to do it. And so I'm not super concerned about it as far as Alabama going forward, because I don't know how many offenses they're in the conference that they're going to run into, like the one that they played tonight. That might be, besides Alabama, that might be the second best offense in the SEC. So they might be through that. And I don't think they're going to see anything like it again until they get to the SEC championship at the earliest, when they get to Florida.
Whoa. We're not there yet. So before we get to that, Alabama is not a Big 12 team, but Ole Miss is a Big 12 team. I mean, that's what they do right there. Like that is it. And so, but I think it's kind of like, first of all, thank God, thank the football gods for Lane Kiffin and his arrival in Oxford. Like, what a perfect fit. And we thought it was perfect, but it's already like exceeding all of our expectations. He's trolling Saban. He's like narking on the Saban son group text between Pruitt, Muschamp, and whoever else is in there. And I actually think like that this game is probably a pretty, like, I don't know. I'd be worried right now if I'm Alabama, not in like the broader sense, but just in the sense of what this matchup is going to look like moving forward. Because Saban has dominated, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, but like Saban's what now 11-0, 12-0, whatever he is against his former assistants. But the reason, part of the reason,
it's 21-0.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, all right. So okay, you're right. So 21-0 now against former assistants, and part of the reason he dominates those guys is because Saban has the blueprint. Saban has the best players, and those guys are using Saban's blueprint. Well, Kiffin has got all the, he knows the way Saban does it, but he's not going to try to out Saban. And this is going to be a guy that's going to be able to move the ball. And he's, I think, exceeding my expectations in year one. I thought he'd be a good offensive coach, but I mean, goodness gracious, like this is absurd. And so I think this is really fun to have Ole Miss looks like the disruptor that it was under Hugh Freeze right now. And it's not going to be this year because their defense just isn't good enough, but they'll get some players on defense and they'll start playing better there. And I just think having Ole Miss as that sort of thorn in the side of the SEC Blue Bloods, especially with Lane Kiffin as the face of that program, is going to be hella fun.
Yeah, Lane's going to get him at least once. I think that's what the main takeaway from tonight is. They're going to get him at least once while Lane's there, assuming he's there for a few years. So it's just, yeah. You guys want to have some box score fun with this one? Because this is a really fun box score.
Box score boy, BSB, take us there.
All right. First of all, Alabama was 6 of 7 on third downs. Ole Miss was 4 of 4 on fourth down. Let's see. Mac Jones, 417 yards, 2 touchdowns. How do you throw for that many yards and only 2 touchdowns? Devontae Smith, 13 catches, 164 yards, 1 touchdown. Jalen Waddle, 6 catches, 120 yards, no touchdowns. How do you catch all those passes and not catch a touchdown? Najee Harris, this is why. Najee Harris, 23 carries, 206 yards, 5 touchdowns. And then on the Rebels side, Matt Corral, 21 of 28 for 365 and 2 touchdowns, while he also rushed for 40 yards. But the Rebels had 2 guys go over 120 yards rushing, and Snoop Connor and Jerry and Ely. Connor getting 128 and 2 touchdowns, Ely getting 120 and 2 touchdowns. And don't worry, they're receivers. There's plenty there for them too. Elijah Moore, 11 catches, 143 yards on 11 targets. Every single target to Elijah Moore was caught. Kenny Yaboya, 7 catches for 181 yards, 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. So he missed one. So not a perfect night for him.
I was right now. Scout is doing soccer, right? And when you go to these soccer games, there's always like the one kid on the other team who's like, probably turned 8. Or like is about to turn 8 and can like just like places in like the 7 and under, whatever. And, he's probably going to start shaving when he's like 12 or whatever. And he just scores like 25 goals over the course of like a 20-minute game. And it's just no one else. Like everyone else is just like, come on, asshole. Like, just like, let someone else play. Like, that's kind of what I feel like watching Najee Harris against that Ole Miss team. Like, it looks like the big brother. It looks like the kid that is going to get disqualified from the next Pee Wee football game because he's over the weight limit. Like, he's just beasting those guys, and it was like a very animalistic performance by him. And I mean, look, I know Ole Miss's defense isn't any good, but that was fun to watch.
Najee Harris could have been a first-round pick last year, came back for his senior season, and finally today, after all of those career carries, just had his first career fumble.
That's right. And
it was a terrible game for him.
Yeah. and you could have made a case that was a stop of forward progress. But I guess it was pretty bang bang. You guys want to know? So the dentist sucked me into playing a little more on that game than I would have anticipated. He hit his max with his bookie on the on Bama first half and Ole Miss and Alabama team total. And so he called me to see if I would
get more
for him. So I got in on it with him. And so I just sort of had, and so he just doubled up whatever I put down because I he made me max out my bets. And, and so I lost the Bama first half bet. And so I was sort of in a bad mood. And then, but the rest of the game, it was just, all right. And we put more on the Bama team total, and clearly the game total was going to hit. So it ended up being a good night, but It was the dentist had me in a bad mood in the first half.
I mean, not so bad that you're going to Danny Cannell not go to the dentist for 5 years or anything like that.
No, like I said, we ended up being nice. Like we ended up good. So
yeah,
all's well ends well.